Just keep this in mind. They're playing our CDs when you're not home. They're playing my tapes in your own car, in the tape deck. And I'm influencing your children.
So to those of you out there who are still working against equal rights, we have a message for you. You think we're sinful? You fight against our rights. You say we all lead lives you can't respect. But you're just frightened. You think that we'll corrupt your kids if our agenda goes unchecked. Funny, just this once, you're correct.
We have never invested as much in public education as we should have because we've always had kind of a private notion of children. Your kid is yours and totally your responsibility. We haven't had a very collective notion of these are our children. So part of it is we have to break through our kind of private idea that kids belong to their parents or kids belong to their families and recognize that kids belong to whole communities.
Many parents have stated to us this week that we work for them, the taxpayers. This is a misconception. And so I'd like to take a moment to explain.
And we were, yes, elected by you to make decisions for your families, but based on the information we receive from the district and not because of public opinion. But like Jen said, that's to do what you want us to do. That's not our job.
Hey YouTube kids, I'm Lil Nas X. I'm a rapper, singer, songwriter, and sometimes I'm a cowboy. And just like you, I love to learn new things.
The video, which was co-directed by Lil Nas X, is filled with biblical and ancient Greek references. And at one point, the 21-year-old slides down a pole to hell to seduce the devil and gives Satan a lap dance.
About 120 juniors, girls and boys at Columbia Grammar and Prep School were subjected to Fonte's class called Pornography Literacy, an intersectional focus on mainstream porn, because she taught at an elite Manhattan school for high school students. Fonte's class included material such as semi-nude women in bondage, porn genres including incest themes, barely legal, and kink and BDSM.
Listen, if you're ever going to commit a crime, you should do it now because you're still a minor. And I'm influencing your children.
It was Vladimir Lenin, founder of the Russian Communist Party, who famously said, "Give me just one generation of youth and I'll transform the world." You know, it's always been about the youth. Have you ever noticed how the entertainment industry targets the youth? You know, almost exclusively in a lot of areas. And from the Beatles all the way to Post Malone, it's always had the same effect. These famous adult celebrities stand elevated on stages before tens of thousands of screaming teenagers, and they're worshipped like gods. You know, and what is the root word of celebrity? Celeb, you know, as in to celebrate. They are celebrated people. Let me say that again, celebrated people. These people that you're looking at right now, at least according to our society, are supposed to be respected and admired. But here's an important distinction. These people are not on these stages because the world celebrates them. No, it's that the world celebrates them because they're the people that are on the stage. And, you know, as far as the kids are concerned, all they want to do is just fit in and be accepted. You know, they're not creating this culture. No, the attitudes and behaviors that we see demonstrated by the youth is actually just a direct reflection of the influence that this trash has had on them. And while it is true that it's the parents who bear the responsibility to protect their children from these terrible influences, in these last days, it's becoming increasingly more difficult to shelter your children from this propaganda. I mean, the bus driver will be playing this music as they drive to school. The bus will then pass by numerous billboards, you know, and advertisements promoting sex, drugs, and rock and roll. And then at school, all the kids are going to be talking about it. And then the school is going to send your kid home with a whole bunch of homework to do so that they're too busy to spend any quality time with you. And so now, instead of your child learning the values and knowledge that you might regard as important throughout the week, he or she will instead be subjected to the state-approved curriculum, you know, at a government-funded building that a big school bus will literally drive them to, which might include things like, hey kids, did you know that you could buy condoms at any age? Or did you know that you don't need your parents' permission to have an abortion? And so even at school, the teachers are just regurgitating the same narrative that the kids are already hearing from their favorite pop stars, you know, and on YouTube and their favorite cartoons and TV programs and the whole entertainment industry. And so when will you people realize that this whole system is working in concert against God and against you? It's becoming inescapable. And I keep thinking about this new normal that we keep hearing about. And I gotta say, as a guy with a pretty fair balance of conservative and liberal friends, nobody likes this new normal stuff. But that doesn't really matter to the ruling class, because they know that they can't teach an old dog new tricks, you know? And besides, we're all gonna die off within the next 50 years anyways. No, it's the youth. The new normal is for the youth, you know, because they grew up in these conditions, so they're used to it. They're gonna be used to it. This world is all they've known. And that's the type of society that the ruling class really needs to fully push this agenda forward. Because 20 years from now, when the kids of today are the ones in charge and running things, and President Biden and President Trump are long gone, all this insane stuff that we're going through right now will just be another chapter in the history books. But all of the changes that have been made, and the restrictions that have been imposed, and the laws that have been passed, these things will remain. And so it's not hyperbole to say that they are coming for the kids. And not only are they coming for your kids, but they're doing this right inside of your own living room, you know, because whatever you're doing, despite the virtues and values that you're attempting to instill into your children, you know, we got to just accept and understand what we're up against here. Because the reality is that the youth of today have inherited a world that surrounds them with digital screens that just constantly broadcast and push propaganda on them. You know, and all this propaganda is dressed up and disguised as popular trends and what's cool and what's hip, you know, so the kids go along with it to be accepted. And so, yeah, they really are targeting your kids. I guess the question is, who's going to stand in their way?
Ever inherited money or property, take a step forward.
Of course.
Related to your race, ethnicity, gender, appearance, or sexual orientation.
My name is John Paul Kane. I am a school teacher, currently teaching kindergarten. Oh, I'm also a drag performer.
These scissors really come in handy in art class. These colored pencils too. These new socks, they can be a real lifesaver. I finally got my own phone to stay in touch with my mom.
This is the world you are graduating into. This is what I want to talk about today with you for a few minutes. To lead in shaping a new world order for the 21st century.
because of public opinion. But like Jen said, that's to do what you want us to do. That's not our job.
And your parents are so supportive of you, but they've encouraged you to stay and be who you are. So how has that inspired you to be open about dressing in drag?
They support me by letting me do what I want to do.
The influence of this black magician and professing Satanist upon popular culture has compelled some researchers to consider him the real father of the modern New Age movement.
I can't think of any other occultist who's been more influential on rock musicians than Aleister Crowley, no one close. London Times called Crowley the unsung hero of the 1960s. In fact, if you look at the 1960s counterculture leaders, John Lennon, he said his whole philosophy was, and he quoting Aleister Crowley's axiom, do what thou wilt, was the whole Beatles philosophy, he said in his interviews before his death was do what thou willst. And they put their heroes up on Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band album, and who did they place there? Aleister Crowley. In fact, that whole album, as we show in our rockumentary, was basically a tribute to Crowley's New Eon, along with their Satanic Majesty's Request by the Stones that the Beatles put out with Sgt. Pepper. In fact, we make a really clear case for Sgt. Pepper being Crowley. In fact, Crowley died 20 years before that album came out, and of course the song 20 years ago today, Sgt. Pepper taught the band to play.
It was 20 years ago today, Sgt. Pepper taught the band to play.
Well, I've been an admirer of Aleister Crowley. I think that I'm carrying on much of the work that he started over 100 years ago, and I think the 60s themselves. You know, Crowley said he was in favor of finding your own self and do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law.
Jimmy Page on Magic. My house used to belong to Aleister Crowley. I knew that when I moved in. Magic is very important, if people can go through it. I think Crowley is completely relevant to today. We're still seeking for truth. The search goes on, said Jimmy Page. Jimmy Page was now seriously obsessed with Crowley's work. Page allegedly got the band, -1, to join in an ancient ceremony. John Paul Jones was either skeptical enough or learned enough to stay far away from this idea. The first evidence of this pact showed up on Led Zeppelin 3, written into the vinyl with So Mote It Be on one side and Do What Thou Wilt on the other.
And we all know the formula. I mean, we've seen it for years because it's the very same formula that has already been used for the past few generations. And the formula is that you use celebrated people or celebrities to indoctrinate the kids, to work as mouthpieces for the people that are actually behind the agenda. Because if people like Ted Turner, you know, and Bill Gates and George Soros were to try to get on a stage and influence the youth, that wouldn't work. You know, so instead they speak their messages through the mouths of these attractive and talented young celebrities. That's who they put on the stages. That's who the kids respond to. And they continue to use this approach, you know, because it works. Because every machine shop that I've worked at over the last decade has been filled with a bunch of old dudes that are still just listening to all their favorite classic rock songs on repeat. You know, and they talk about the Beatles and Led Zeppelin and Leonard Skinner. And even pushing the age of 50 or 60, you know, these guys are still enchanted by these bands that influenced them back when they were young, you know. In fact, I remember watching Joe Schimmel's classic expose on the music industry called They Sold Their Souls for Rock and Roll. And I remember hearing some guy make the statement that back in the 60s, whenever the members of the Beatles would adopt a new hairstyle, it would immediately become like the new style for the youth. And everybody in the streets would suddenly be rocking that same style. Actually, I'll just find that clip.
I grew up with them. They helped us grow up. They got me arrested 3 or 4 times.
I think they did a lot for society.
Those songs are in my memory banks I think they're actually my genetic material.
All-time favorite musical group?
Beatles.
If they dressed a certain way, everybody wanted to be like that.
When the Beatles got long hair, I got long hair. The fact that my mother didn't like it was an enormous part of its appeal.
And so this is a classic model of indoctrination. It's the gradual degradation. I mean, you're probably familiar with the history that when Elvis Presley was popular, there was a major controversy over whether television stations should be permitted to show his dance moves, you know, which were apparently deemed to be sexually inappropriate because he would gyrate his hips, you know. And you fast forward 10 years and now there's songs on the radio with lyrics that are describing sex and drugs. You know, but back then they would still have to kind of veil it in some form of poetry. But by the 90s, you know, almost all the popular songs were explicitly about sex and drugs, or just about being depressed, you know, with most of the stars being suicidal drug addicts. And meanwhile, over in the cities, gangster rap was taking over the airwaves, you know, and people like Tupac Shakur and Chris Wallace, aka the Notorious B.I.G., you know, and all these other self-serving rap stars were dominating the industry, performing massive shows for sold-out crowds of teenagers who would hang on every obscene words that these clowns had to say. I mean, the influence that this stuff has on our culture is ridiculous. And I know that that's a true statement because I remember the influence that it had on me. And a lot of you might not know this, but I spent almost 2 decades pursuing a career in secular music, you know, with some small successes. That's me there, you know, trying to influence crowds of hundreds with the very same message that had influenced me. But my experience as a struggling music artist is a topic for another video, and I don't want to stray too far from the plot of this series, but I just can't help but to reflect on my own experience with indoctrination and how dramatically my life was affected by it. You know, because in my generation, it was Eminem and Blink-182 and that whole era of obnoxious music. And I remember idolizing my favorite musicians with a godlike level of respect. You know, I remember seeing this group called Head PE play a show when I was like 15. And I remember admiring the members of the band like they were just so special and so cool. You know, and the singer/rapper guy was decked out in all these flamboyant clothes. And I was just starstruck, you know, by how cool he was. And I jumped around and I pounded my fist in approval as he rapped and sang about not giving an F word, you know, or getting laid and getting wasted. And pretty much all the songs were just arrogant messages about being a selfish idiot, you know, but there I was banging my head, you know, screaming for more. And meanwhile, I had these wonderful parents at home who loved me and who care about me and who invested in my future. You know, and they're telling me all these things to beware of and virtues to adopt and all the morals and actual wisdom that a child needs, you know. And they're teaching me from the Bible and taking me to church. But I thought that my parents were overbearing and ignorant, you know. They didn't know what this world is really like. They didn't know what I was going through because times had changed, you know, and they were old and out of touch. But then you got this other adult who's also trying to influence me. And that's the cool guy on stage who's famous and everybody's cheering for him. And he's trying to get me to chant along with him about not giving an F word, you know. But somehow his message seemed a lot more appealing to me than my parents did, you know, because he was just telling me to do whatever I want, to do what thou wilt. And do what thou wilt is the great overarching philosophy that this new normal is hinged on. You know, it's all about your identity and your classifications and your social preferences, you know, and just be yourself and do your thing and get yours and do you, you know, and do it your own way and blah, blah, blah. And really, pretty much, it's just a reinforcement of the satanic motto, do what thou wilt. Just have as much fun as you can and experience as many pleasures as you can in your short time here on earth. Because when you die, you're just going to disappear, you know, because that's what the kids of today are being taught. They're taught that life has no objective purpose, you know, and that we're just mere animals on a tiny planet spinning around within a massive universe. And they are taught about sexuality, you know, and how fun it is. And they watch these videos and demonstrations that previous generations would have considered pornographic. But I guess in 2021, we've already long since come to accept this type of so-called education. You know, and not only are they conducting these hedonistic sex ed courses, but they're promoting it as a good and normal thing. And that it should never be repressed, you know, because it's totally normal. You know, just do it safely. And here, take a free condom. But you know what I mean? And just watch the way that public education will follow in direct succession behind the media and the entertainment industry. You know, because the teachers, obviously, are not all members of elitist secret societies, you know, who are knowingly participating in a manufactured agenda to indoctrinate the youth with a godless worldview. No, the teachers themselves are indoctrinated by the same propaganda that they teach, you know, and that's the larger point, that this has been a procession, you know. It's been a gradual progression, you know, through the incremental corruption of generation after generation. We have finally gotten to a point where the children of today, who are predominantly influenced by the media and popular culture, are being raised by parents who were also predominantly influenced by media and popular culture. You know, and even my generation was raised by parents who were predominantly influenced by media and popular culture. You know, so this has been a long-winded and well-played agenda, indeed. You know, because now the kids are fully adapted to an existence that relies on media and popular culture to define one's social status. And we've built a technological prison around ourselves that will be inherited by this upcoming generation. And trust me, they're ready to accept those keys, you know, because they have been trained to excel in this new world order. And then while we, as the grown-ups and the parents, you know, are too busy being distracted by the bells and the whistles and the glitz and the glamour and the sex and the drugs and the rock and roll that we're constantly bombarded with, you know, and all of this provocative entertainment that surrounds us, we seem to be forgetting that our precious little kids, who are so innocent and so impressionable, you know, and so trusting and so curious, that our kids are falling victim to these same distractions. And as a father of 5, I can tell you, I can confirm the old cliche that they really do grow up too fast. You know, they grow up so fast. And we cannot allow this fallen world to swallow up our children. And we need to be vigilant, because I know it's hard to believe, but we are witnessing a war on kids.
Good evening, I'm Jamie Yukas. Adriana Diaz is off. Tonight, police in Houston are investigating a deadly crush at a music festival. At least 50,000 fans were there to hear rapper Travis Scott when chaos in the crowd turned to panic. At least 8 people were killed and many more injured. One concert goer called it hell.
So I'm helping people, I'm pulling people out, and like it just felt like we was like literally like in hell, bro. Like it felt like we was in a concert in hell. You couldn't breathe, you couldn't see. Like, just imagine all the people they're gonna find tonight who was in that crowd, who nobody could see, who nobody could hear, who passed out, and everybody was just trampling on top of them the whole concert. Like,
things got off to a hectic start at Astroworld Festival this morning when fans stampeded through the entrance, ripping down barricades and trampling over each other.
This world is like walking into another world.
Travis Scott is the GOAT.
I mean, I'm around people, they're yelling, "Stop the show," chant. People were chanting, "Help, stop the show." And that's when I was like, dude. And then he stopped for a second and he said, "What?" And then he looked over on one side. He told them, like, "Hey, get her up, get her up." And at one point, there's a clip on Twitter. I've been hunting through Twitter trending, and you hear him say, "Stop the what?" And then he just tells his DJs, his name was Chase B, to keep going. And they kept it going. And there was people freaking out.
Two hands to the sky. Two hands to the sky. Two hands up, y'all. 2 hands up. Y'all know what y'all came to do. Chase me, let's go.
People laid out dead, and like once the medics tried to help them, they wasn't responding. They moved to the next person. It was nothing they could have do. Like, this really fucked me up and like really spooked me tonight. Like, that was like some demonic. Like, and what was so crazy, like people were screaming help, trying to tell Travis Scott. They was like help. The whole crowd was just going like help, help, help. And he just kept going, bro. It was like, this was scary, bro. It was so demonic, bro.
Stop that show! 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 Stop that show!
More devastating is this was an event for all ages. We're told the youngest person treated 10 years old. Overall, 300 people were treated.
Listen, Satan is the chief musician, the choir leader, if you will, of this worldly music. And all these entertainers and celebrities, they part of his orchestra. These individuals have sold their souls to get the finer things in life, to have the material possessions. And I'm just going to give you the blunt, honest truth, and that is they don't care about the people. It's too much idolatry going on. Often people want to come to the defense of these satanic, Luciferian artists, not understanding that every word that proceedeth out of their mouth is to promote a death culture. It's about death. It's about sacrifice. And ladies and gentlemen, the Astro World Festival by Travis Scott was done in a very ritualistic fashion.
Should I ask who you made the bargain with?
Y'all on here if y'all think I sold my soul. Y'all coming right with me, you dummies.
It's a story that we all know. The struggling artist or aspiring celebrity who just can't seem to catch a break, and then one night this person, who's down on their luck, so to speak, makes that infamous deal. And in a desperate effort to attain success, they make a plea to Satan and offer their own eternal soul and proclaim their willingness to serve him in exchange for wealth and worldly acclaim, or success in whatever it is they're trying to achieve. And depending on the story, the circumstances vary. Sometimes the struggling artist actually encounters the devil himself, as claimed by Robert Johnson, who is often considered to be the father of rock and roll.
This man was a nobody. And then he disappears. A year and a half later, he's doing things with the guitar that even his mentors can't do.
How could Robert possibly have gotten that good that fast?
Robert Johnson is considered the king of the Delta blues. He's also considered the father of rock and roll. It is very significant that Johnson would be considered the father of rock and roll, as it is alleged that he had sold his soul to Satan in Clarksdale, Mississippi, in exchange for guitar playing abilities and worldwide fame. It was after Johnson made his alleged pact with Satan that he became the king of the Delta blues.
Well, they say he sold himself to the devil, and that's what they say. I never seen him have to practice anything like that. Never seen him sit down and learn a song. He already knew it. Once he attempted to play it, he knew it. He had a built-in computer. Everything he heard was there. All they had to do was punch the button.
The minutes goes, Robert went to the crossroads, got down on his knees, handed his guitar to the devil. The devil said, once you receive this guitar back, your soul is mine.
whether or not the crossroads of Highway 49 and 61 are the exact place that Robert Johnson sold his soul, we cannot know for sure. But one thing is clear, Johnson had indeed given his soul to Satan. This is brought out in his own lyrics, which testify to this.
Early this morning, ooh, he knocked upon my door. And I said, hello, Satan, I believe it's time to go. Me and the devil was walking side by side. Me and the devil, ooh, was walking side by side.
But Robert Johnson is far from the only celebrity or famous person who claims to have sold their soul to the devil. And a lot of times, instead of actually meeting the devil in person, the deal is apparently struck through prayer or rituals.
Really well now, but didn't you release a CD like almost 10 years ago?
Yeah, I mean, I released a gospel record when I was 15 because I grew up in, a household where all I ever did was listen to gospel music, and my parents are both traveling ministers, and so I kind of sang about, what was going on in my life at 15, and that's how I got introduced to the music industry. I swear I wanted to be like the Amy Grant of music, yeah, but it didn't work out, and so I sold my soul to the devil. So
You're still out here doing these songs, you're still on tour.
I do, but I don't take it for granted.
Why do you still do it? Why are you still out here?
Well, it goes back to the destiny thing. I made a bargain with it, a long time ago, and I'm holding up my end.
What was your bargain?
To get where I am now.
Should I ask who you made the bargain with?
with the chief commander.
On this earth?
And on this earth, and then in the world we can't see.
But as far as this music stuff, I won't be doing this music stuff anymore. I started this because this was my dream, and I wanted to make sure I could get me and my kids out the hood. It's always been my passion to rap. A while ago, I had signed a contract, and I didn't know nothing about the business or this game out here. And just right now, I'm realizing that I signed my soul. I sold my soul to the devil. I signed myself to the devil. I don't even own myself no more. I sold my soul to the mother devil, and I done prayed. I prayed and I prayed and I prayed. It's just like, I don't know if God can get me out of this.
But is it true? Can a man really trade his soul for fame and riches? And does the Bible have anything to say about this? Well, the first thing that comes to my mind is when the devil attempted to make a very similar deal with Jesus himself, an event that's often called the temptation of Christ, and it's documented in Matthew chapter 4 as well as Luke chapter 4. And let's just read it. Okay, so Matthew chapter 4, verse 1. Then was Jesus led up of the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted of the devil. And when he had fasted 40 days and 40 nights, he was afterward and hungered. And when the tempter came to him, he said, and the tempter being the devil, he said, if thou be the Son of God, command that these stones be made to bread. And so you see, he's tempting Jesus right now because, as it says in verse 2, he had just fasted for 40 days and 40 nights, and he was hungry, and being God and being able to, perform miracles, the devil shows up and says, why don't you turn these rocks into bread, because you can eat. And that was a temptation because Jesus was hungry. All right, but moving on. But he answered and said, it is written, man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceedeth out of the mouth of God. And so Jesus quotes scriptures. And then the devil taketh him up into the holy city, and setteth him on the pinnacle of the temple, and saith unto him, if thou be the Son of God, cast thyself down. For it is written, he shall give his angels charge concerning thee, and in their hands they shall bear thee up, lest at any time thou dash thy foot against a stone. Jesus said unto him, it is written, thou shalt not tempt the Lord thy God. And so he's also acknowledging his deity right there. But now really pay attention to verses 8 through 11 here. It says, again, the devil taketh him up into an exceeding high mountain, and showeth him all the kingdoms of the world and the glory of them, and saith unto him, all these things will I give thee, if thou wilt fall down and worship me. Then saith Jesus unto him, Get thee hence, Satan, for it is written, Thou shalt worship the Lord thy God, and him only shalt thou serve. Then the devil leaveth him, and behold, angels came and ministered unto him. And so here we actually see the devil promising Christ all the wealth and power and prestige in the world, if only Jesus would bow down and worship him. You know, and of course, Jesus rejected the devil and pretty much told him to kick rocks. But that's the Messiah that we're talking about. You know, of course, he did not bow down to Satan. But now think of the world around you and ask yourself, how many among us would deny that offer like Jesus did? Or better yet, how many people do you know that would quickly bow down before the devil in exchange for all the wealth and luxury and fame in the world? Because I'll bet you could name a few. And so why wouldn't the devil still use this tactic? You know, the Bible calls him the tempter and the god of this world, which he clearly is if he were able to offer all the kingdoms of earth to Jesus, you know, and the devil uses the pleasures and enticements of sin to enslave men. So it's pretty feasible to consider the prospect that the devil has his hand in the so-called success of these young and influential celebrities who are indoctrinating and corrupting the youth by day and then driving around in Lamborghinis by night, you know, and attending mansion parties. But honestly, you don't need to be an entrepreneur or an aspiring celebrity to see what a deal with the devil looks like. You know, all you really got to do is just look out your front window and just observe the nature and the culture of this society, where the quickest route to wealth is to lie, to cheat, and to steal, you know, to sell drugs and to sell sex, to conduct pyramid schemes, you know, or scam people online, etc. And even you watching this video, you could probably become a millionaire in 12 months, but it would require you to abandon your integrity and dignity, you know, and you'll have to be willing to deceive and exploit others, you know, and maybe even hurt others. And so, you know, when you frame it that way, you can make the argument that people who are motivated by worldly gratification, you know, and those who are willing to do immoral things for money have indirectly already made that same deal with the devil. Because the devil couldn't care less if you worship him by name or if you identify as a Satanist. You know, as long as you're not serving God, you're right where the devil wants you. And he keeps you there with the hollow comforts of sex and drugs and entertainment. You know, when you adopt the status quo lifestyle of this constant consumption and indulgence and just moving from one distraction to the next. And it's all there just to keep you from thinking your own thoughts and examining your heart. You know, it's all about distracting you from seeking God. And whenever this topic of the satanic entertainment industry comes up, so does the name of one particular man. Aleister Crowley, the self-described Satan-worshipping and ritual magician who once prophesied, while under demonic influence no less, that the world had entered the Aeon of Horus, a new age where mankind would reject the antiquated faiths of our fathers and would instead seek our own personally derived enlightenment. You know, an age that would endorse sexual liberation and remove all restrictions against the free exercise of anybody's individual will. And we are about to explore the circumstances which motivated Crowley to literally nosedive right into the depths of evil. And we will answer the question of how one man who referred to himself as the Great Beast 666 and the wickedest man on earth managed to influence the course of the future with the expression of one very simple and very satanic ideal. Do what thou wilt.
Well, I just want to leave you with this. You know, my album is called Do What Thou Wilt.
I fell into the trap of the black magic, Kabbalism, and just the Crowleyism of, you know, the times. It was a significant part of that middle point of the 70s.
Well, I've been an admirer of Aleister Crowley. I think that I'm carrying on much of the work that he started over 100 years ago, and I think the 60s themselves. You know, Crowley said, do what thou wilt, shall be the whole of the law.
John Lennon. He said his whole philosophy was, and he quoting Aleister Crowley's axiom, do what thou wilt, was the whole Beatles philosophy, he said, in his interviews before his death was do what thou willst. And they put their heroes up on Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band album, and who did they place there? Aleister Crowley. In fact, that whole album, as we show in our rockumentary, was basically a tribute to Crowley's New Aeon, along with their Satanic Majesty's Request by the Stones that the Beatles put out with Sgt. Pepper. In fact, we make a really clear case for Sgt. Pepper being Crowley. In fact, Crowley died 20 years before that album came out. And, of course, the song 20 years ago today, Sgt. Pepper taught the band to play. It was 20 years ago today, Sgt. Pepper
So who was Aleister Crowley? And why do all these celebrated people love him so much? And how did he become so significant in this topic of the satanic influence on modern entertainment and culture? I can tell you that I'm far from the first filmmaker to highlight a connection between this guy and the moral degradation, of music and entertainment and all these influential arts, and thereby our modern culture. But based on the modest amount of videos that I've seen regarding this topic, there's plenty of info out there about this guy's biography. But when it comes to exploring the origins of his spiritual motivations, and sort of the spiritual element of this whole thing, most of what I saw was pretty convoluted and limited, which was usually because the presenter themselves was a fellow unbeliever who was also intrigued by the hedonistic allure of the entertainment industry, although they probably wouldn't describe themselves that way, but I will. Because it's true. I mean, probably like 3 out of the last 5 videos that I watched in preparation for making this video, Crowley is presented in a sympathetic, and other times heroic light. And from the standpoint of this world, with the celebrity culture in mind specifically, Aleister Crowley blazed the trail of a rock star. Rampant sex and drugs and selfish indulgence and excess, not to mention fame and worldly acclaim. And as you will understand by the conclusion of this video, a lot of the bad behaviors that we attribute to modern celebrities are eerily similar to the lifestyle and teachings of old man Crowley nearly 100 years ago, back when society was a little more morally upright and modest. I mean, you think of rock stars trashing hotel rooms and sleeping with groupies and doing copious amounts of drugs, and then stepping out on stages before hundreds of thousands of kids, and promoting these terrible, sinful things, to these impressionable audiences. And this could easily be described as a continuation of Crowley's influence and what Crowley intended to do. And to complete my point, I'm just going to run through a really quick summary of Crowley's bio, but I'm not going to go into much depth because there's just too much to cover. Instead, I invite you to research him yourself and let me know in the comments if I'm exaggerating any of this. Aleister Crowley was born in England to a very wealthy and privileged family. He was originally named Edward Alexander Crowley. His grandfather owned a successful and popular distillery, which would provide a large but limited level of financial security to the whole Crowley family. His parents were devout Christians who participated in the Plymouth Brethren Church. And although Crowley, who really looked up to his dad, initially embraced the Christian lifestyle of his family, he soon began to resent its doctrine, and he began to demonstrate a strong aversion to the moral precepts of Christianity. And this growing animosity was only exacerbated by the death of his father, after which Aleister became increasingly hostile towards Christianity, and eventually became a self-described enemy of God. In the early 1890s, when Crowley was a teenager, he began to publicly consume drugs and alcohol and engage in sexual deviancies, even bringing prostitutes into his mother's bed just to spite her. And again, though that might seem just like regular behavior for a teenager here in 2021, it was quite odd in Crowley's time. In fact, it was Crowley's own mother who gave him the nickname The Beast, a title that he would revel in and later went on to adopt as one of his many aliases and pen names. In his college years, Crowley was an avid and talented chess player, and he even flirted with the idea of competing professionally. And he was an artist and a painter, and was also well received as a poet, who had a penchant for writing erotic poetry, which was usually steeped in sexual impurity and indulgence. And this sexual openness would become a defining characteristic of Aleister Crowley. While still in college, Crowley began to publicize his bisexuality and to maintain openly gay relationships. And again, this was in the United Kingdom in the late 1800s, in a time and place where such things were still frowned upon by popular society, or at least considered taboo. And as I'm sure you would expect, today Crowley is celebrated and heroicized for his influential promotion of homosexuality. But the real priority of Crowley's sex life was just perversity. He lusted to indulge in whatever common society considered to be unnatural or obscene. And as Crowley continued to develop his occultic philosophies and rituals, he would integrate these sexual fetishes, which were often sadistic in nature, into his practices. And this became the sex magic by which he is now famous, or perhaps infamous. In 1898, he joined a secret society called the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, which was founded by Freemasons and modeled after Rosicrucianism. And if you don't know what these things are, you're just going to have to do your own research because, again, I don't got time to break all this down. I'm only trying to give you a very general summation of what this guy was all about. And besides, Crowley's biography is more diverse and convoluted than the entire James Bond anthology. You know, and I use that example unironically because according to numerous historians, Crowley was even a British secret agent for a period of time, you know, and check into that yourself. But the point is, I'm just going to stick to the basics to make a larger point. So where were we? We got Crowley here, you know, the great folk hero who was in reality a selfish and sexually perverted heroin addict whose hatred for Christianity escalated to voluntary possession by demons, you know. And in this process, he landed in the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, which is where I left off. And he was invited into this society by a prominent chemist and fellow occultist by the name of Julian N. Baker. And though he was generally respected by the group, he was eventually kicked to the curb by the order because apparently his obscene proclivities and scummy antics proved too unlikable for even them. And then in the years to follow, Crowley spent a few years writing about and popularizing various practices of witchcraft, you know, some of which have also come to be embraced by today's world. Things like tarot card readings or yoga. Now, somewhere along his journey, Crowley got married to a woman named Rose, who accompanied him as he went about conducting his campaign against God. And history says that while they were on their honeymoon in Egypt, Rose would go into these trances and deliver cryptic messages to Aleister about how the god Horus has been waiting for them and that sort of thing, you know. And Rose actually helped Aleister to produce his most famous book, the Book of the Law, which, according to them, was transcribed from a spiritual messenger of Horus named Aiwass, or I'm not sure how it's pronounced, but that's how it's spelled. And apparently Crowley just meditated for a few days and wrote down what this disembodied voice spoke to him. And anyways, the Book of the Law would become the foundational source for Crowley's invented religion, which he would name Thelema, a satanic religion that is still practiced today. And the Book of the Law is also the origin of Crowley's famous mantra, of which I keep repeating, do what thou wilt. You know, and most of you have probably heard that before, and certainly you have if you watched part 1 of this series. But the quote goes on. It's actually, do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. And what he's saying here is that in his projected future, there will only be one universal law, to do what you wilt, or pretty much to do what you want, you know, to serve yourself before all others and just do whatever you want and everyone else be damned, you know. And remember, this is not just Crowley writing about his opinions. This is supposedly some demon prophesying about the near future through Crowley. He called it the Eon of Horus, and he said that this eon was now upon us. And you got to think when you look around, you know, not only has our world embraced this notion of do what thou wilt, you know, but also we participate in ceremonious pagan rituals and witchcraft, and often unbeknownst to us, it's just part of the culture here in this fallen world. Think back to the scriptures I referenced earlier, you know, when the devil attempted to make a deal with Jesus, promising all the wealth and all the fame in the world if Jesus would just worship him, you know, aka sell his soul. And while most people laugh at the notion of celebrities acquiring fame and fortune in response to selling their soul to the devil, you know, everybody actually acknowledges this transaction. I mean, it's a phenomenon that even the secular world recognizes, but they call it selling out. You know, instead of selling your soul, it's just selling out. But what does it mean to sell out in context with fame and stardom? It means that you voluntarily trade in your integrity and principles and promote bad things, you know, for fame in an obviously satanic entertainment industry. And if you're a girl, your fame might come at the cost of your willingness to prance around in front of a crowd of children as you sing explicit songs about inappropriate things while wearing lingerie. You know, and if you're a rapper, you might find yourself reading news headlines about fans of yours who got killed in a drive-by shooting, you know, and the depression may begin to grow inside you as you continue to rap about what a tough gangbanger you are, while going home to a secluded mansion in the hills where you can't even hear the gunshots being exchanged by the kids who are imitating the nonsense that you're rapping about, you know. Or maybe you're the talented salesman who stumbles into that $1 million deal, and all you got to do is tell a couple lies, destroy a few businesses, you know, maybe buy off a few politicians, and then it's off to the Bahamas with you, you know, and you could be the next CEO. And this is the do what thou wilt model of success. And it all equates to worshiping the devil. Because as God watches down, we are getting caught up in a self-centered rat race to gain stature in this fallen world system that rewards apathy and compliance. And it doesn't take a seminary graduate to see how well these celebrated people serve Satan's mission, which is ultimately to keep you distracted by sin and lust so that you don't seek God, like I said before. And so that you can join the devil in the lake of fire when this is all said and done. And listen, it is sort of creepy and sort of darkly impressive to compare Crowley's Aeon of Horus prophecy with the world surrounding us, which does seem to embody the spirit of his predictions. But I don't want to give too much credit to the guy. You know, he was not the prolific philosopher that Hollywood paints him to be. He was a deviant and drug-peddling sexual predator. You know, he was a scumbag of the worst degree. Nobody liked him. I mean, his personality sucked. We're talking about a guy that ate poop in an effort to find enlightenment. You know, he was kind of like the G.G. Allin of his time.
Our first guest, G.G. Allin, has been called the most violent man in rock and roll. Some of what you're about to hear may not be suitable for children. This rock musician says he has more power over your children than you do. G.G. Allin brags he's on his way to becoming the leader, the messiah for America's youth. He already claims to have 1 million followers. Wherever he goes, he plays to sell out crowds.
And I'm out for violence, chaos, lawlessness all the way. I don't care about anybody or anything except for myself and my mission. And your kids out there, if you got kids out there, they're going to be my kids. I'm going to own those kids. They're going to do anything that I say.
And why is that? Why do they do anything you say?
Because I'm the king. I'm bringing us to a revolution against the government, against the police, against any form of society that is trying to put us down and restrict us in any way, shape, or manner. You cannot conform. You must be a true nonconformist. To hell with what your parents have to say.
Okay.
I am the man. Okay. All you have to do is listen to what I have to say.
Okay, well, who told you were the messiah?
I said I was. Okay. And I am, because these kids, I get letters from all over the world. People worship me. They come to my shows. I'm going to rape the girls. I might rape the guys. I might have sex. I want it all. I want it all, and I'm going to have it all.
Okay, let me
ask. Because I am everything.
All right, yeah. You go way beyond sex, drugs, and rock and roll in your performances. You self-mutilate on stage.
I self-mutilate. I beat the out of my audience if they're in my way. I take them out. I don't care. I don't care about anybody because I am who I am, and I'm not a phony like everybody else out there. I am real. And how many of you can, at 35 years old, sleep with 16, 12, 13-year-old girls and boys and animals? Hey, this is the life. I got it all. And I got your kids.
Actually, I guess G.G. Allin was kind of more like the Aleister Crowley of our time. But that's beside the point. And the point is that Crowley was just a fool and a jerk, you know, and he was constantly being kicked out of establishments and constantly fleeing the authorities in connection with various crimes, many of which originated from his perverse sex magic. And in 1923, Crowley and his followers were permanently banned from Italy after one of his young disciples died in a manner connected to the cult's sacrilegious and dangerous ritual practices. And after getting kicked out of Italy, you know, he just kind of wandered around looking like a human skeleton, lifeless and sad, and practicing his evil magic, defiling his body, you know, defiling the bodies of others, constantly drunk, constantly high on heroin and other harsh drugs, you know, worshiping demons and attributing pretentious nicknames to himself. Pretty pathetic, huh? And as for his family, do you remember Rose, his wife? You know, I haven't talked much about her because she was always back at home with the kids as Aleister traveled around squandering his inheritance on drugs and prostitutes and establishing his little religion, Thelema. And so Crowley was nowhere to be seen as his little daughter Lilith died at a young age. Regardless, you know, Crowley blamed her death on Rose's alcoholism, and he divorced her. You know, and I would speculate that her alcoholism had to do a lot with the fact that she was married to this wicked and terrible Satanist of a man who treated her like crap. And meanwhile, Crowley just continued to sleep with prostitutes and mistresses and even to bear children with them, who in the end he abandoned as well. Now, when Aleister Crowley's life finally came to an end in 1947, he was living in abject poverty and squalor, you know, and he had squandered away his inheritance on a lifetime's worth of debauchery, you know, and drugs and women, and even his appearance was a sad reflection of a life lived in enslavement to sin. I mean, just look at this guy. Would you let this guy babysit your kids? Seriously. I mean, despite having achieved some level of fame in his lifetime, in the end he was reduced to a pathetic status, and that's what he agreed to when he gave his life over to Satan all those decades back. This is how a deal with the devil looks. Crowley volunteered his service to the devil, and the devil used him like a tool, both literally and figuratively. And in reality, Crowley achieved nothing. By his own admission, he was merely a foolish mortal allowing demons and spirits to channel messages through him. And so in the end, it's the devil who achieved so much through Crowley. And just like any craftsman would do, once Crowley no longer served his purpose as a tool, he was discarded like a broken hammer. And you know what's crazy? All this respect and fame that's attributed to Aleister Crowley, it didn't even come until after he died. So in his lifetime and at the time of, this pathetic situation he was in when he died and that I just described, he had no idea that his legacy would even live on. He had no idea how influential his ideas would be. He died probably feeling like a failure. And when you look at the entertainment industry today, it seems to work in the same way. You got all these stars who embrace the do what thou wilt mantra, and they live large and they trash hotel rooms, they drive fast cars, they have promiscuous sex all the time, and they do drugs nonstop, and they either continue to live like this well into their old age, like Mick Jagger and Grandpa Steven Tyler, long after they could possibly care about the music anymore. And it's almost like they're part of a contract that doesn't allow them to quit, like they're not allowed to retire. And then those that don't make it into old age are rarely lucky enough to make it past the age of 27, and they die as STD-riddled drug addicts, just like their hero Aleister Crowley. And I believe that a lot of these guys on the world stage who claim to have made deals with the devil are being honest, but they're idiots because Satan is the father of lies. And so making a deal with the devil is like loaning money to a thief. You're just going to get screwed because the devil hates us. I mean, he hates me and my fellow saints, because we're his enemy, but he also even hates his own followers, because even people like Aleister Crowley or modern clowns like Marilyn Manson could be redeemed and rescued from the jaws of sin and death if they would only repent and believe, not to mention they're made in the image of God, which Satan despises. And I believe that anyone with a heartbeat inherently understands this. And so it's sad, because you can imagine the inner turmoil that this man suffered as he wrestled endlessly to suppress the truth in his heart. And that doesn't only apply to Crowley, but anybody that is decidedly living in sin. And when you look into the eyes of this man, what do you see? I mean, is this the great beast that he purported to be? The wicked one? Is this the face of a messiah of some kind? No, I mean, if you ask me, these are the eyes of a sad and weak man who has been completely defeated by his own sin and indulgences. And that's pretty much my assessment of the infamous Aleister Crowley. I mean, of course, this was only, like I said, a very short summarization. And I didn't even get into the numerous influential figures from history who were unabashed followers of Crowley. He rubbed shoulders with many people who we would be really surprised by. Like Jack Parsons, for example, the founder of NASA's Jet Propulsion Labs, and who was also an avowed occultist. And I left Parsons out because his story is just crazy, and he's going to have to get his own video sometime down the line. As well as L. Ron Hubbard, founder of Scientology. And I'm honestly really excited to make this video about this topic of Parsons and Hubbard and Crowley, in that aforementioned video I'm going to make, because you're going to be astonished and bewildered to learn just how satanic and weird and crazy our history really is. But that's going to have to wait. Anyways, another famous associate of Crowley's was the famed sexologist Alfred Kinsey, who is the namesake, by the way, of the Kinsey Institute. And apart from being a key figure in modern sex education and public school curriculum, this Kinsey guy was most notorious for things like the encouragement of embracing sexual perversions, also known as the sexual liberation movement that I was talking about with Crowley. And his methods of research included the mass exploitation and actual molestation of hundreds of children so that he could scientifically chart the ways that kids responded to such things. But anyways, it's really terrible, and he's another character that I'm going to investigate in the education chapter of this very video series. So I'm leaving him out as well for now. And because with this video, all I really wanted to do was present an accurate portrayal of Crowley's life, but with the focus being on his animosity towards God and his willing participation with the forces of evil. And I hope that I've adequately done that. And the point that I want you to take away from my commentary in this video has nothing to do with all the crazy stuff and strange accomplishments that he had in his lifetime, but rather the miserable state that he died in after being physically, emotionally, and spiritually defeated by the very sins which he embraced. And I want for you to consider that the next time you see some celebrity wearing a t-shirt with his face on it, or you hear some rock star gloating about having made a deal with the devil, because this is how that deal ends. So can you really sell your soul to the devil? Well, yeah, and many do. Biblically speaking, it is possible to indulge in sin to the point that your conscience can become seared and unresponsive to God's voice. But does the devil really reward his servants with fame and riches? Well, again, I would say yes, but it's demonstrated through the very culture of humanity in this fallen world. Because the devil doesn't care if you acknowledge him, like I said before. He just wants you to avoid God. He doesn't need your allegiance. You know, he already has your allegiance if you're living in sin and if you're not living for God. You know, and it's clear to see that in this world, fame and wealth is held in the highest regard from the general public. You know, that is the dream. And it's not a coincidence that the highly acclaimed celebrity witches of our world, from Crowley to Cobain, tend to meet such a tragic demise. A deal with the devil is a bum deal. It's actually a scam, but what more would you expect from the father of lies? So in closing, why did I spend so much time covering Aleister Crowley and adult celebrities in a video series called The War on Kids? Well, because children are the ones who have always been strategically targeted by this satanic entertainment industry. And the people who we as adults regard as entertainers, to children are educators. You know, and if Crowley's little Eon of Horus prophecy really has been fulfilled, then it was accomplished through the influence of this entertainment industry, you know, which hardly even existed in the time of Crowley's life. I mean, seriously, even the entertainment industry itself was pretty much designed in the wake of Aleister Crowley's influence. And it was through music and entertainment that Crowleyites like Timothy Leary or the Beatles pushed this whole do what thou wilt thing into the mainstream, both in word and practice. And apparently Crowley's influence has only grown since then, because indeed our world now embraces and defends the do what thou wilt lifestyle. At least that's the case from my point of view here in the United States. I mean, we now have passports being issued with X as a gender option. You know, we have Drag Queen Story Hour, which is often praised by the media, where idiotic parents bring their children to local libraries to hear stories being read by men wearing coconut bras and miniskirts. You know, we have children undergoing sex reassignment surgery to the applause of society, pornographic and pedophilic books in elementary school libraries. And the most popular video games are the ones that simulate murder, you know, and the most popular movies are the ones that simulate or document murders. And then you got all these songs, which glorify everything from drug abuse and sex abuse to, again, murder, you know. And you think back to when your grandfather was young and he would just walk around whistling zippity-doo-dah, zippity-day, you know, through his workday. You know, but his grandkids are going through the school day humming songs like WAP or WAP by Cardi B, you know, or maybe some Eminem song or some mumble rap song. And whatever it is, you know, these lyrics, aka messages, are literally about indulging in the maximum excess of sin, you know, and that's what's made to look cool. And you got these teenage boys that are getting lyrics about smacking girls, you know, or selling drugs, getting stuck in their heads, getting stuck in their still developing minds. You know, and they focus on this stuff throughout the day, you know, and they're inundated with it, and they even look up to it. And I would hope that by this point you can see why this has everything to do with the war on kids, because it's the children who are targeted with this stuff, and it's the children who are indoctrinated by this stuff. You know, they're the ones conforming to it as the grown-ups scratch our heads and comment about how weird everything's getting. And then when you look back at Crowley and you realize that all those taboos and ideas that he touted and acts that he practiced, you know, which he was hated for at the time, have now become tenets of the new normal. In today's world, Crowley would fit right in. Heck, he would probably be a celebrity. And the whole transformation is hinged on this principle of do what thou wilt. And even the old folks and the more wholesome portion of our society has embraced this. Even the so-called emerging church and evangelical right is accepting this satanic notion. And you can clearly see it in the humanism and the New Age movements touted by deceivers like Oprah or Joel Osteen. This idea of manifesting your own destiny, you know, or speaking things into existence. That is the epitome of magic and witchcraft. You know, we just don't refer to it as casting spells anymore. It's gone mainstream. You know, the secret societies of Crowley's day have become the governments of our day. And so I'm not being hyperbolic when I say that this world and the ways of this world are downright satanic. And so in a way, if you are worshiping the things of this world, and if you are denying the true God, then you already sold your soul, you know, and we all have this opportunity to cash in our integrity in exchange for wealth and worldly success. So not only is it true that a man can proverbially sell his soul, but that concept is actually the foundation of the very gospel. Because the Bible describes the unsaved man as being a slave to sin, and this reality is encapsulated by everything I just covered in this video, not to mention all the other content on this channel. But fortunately for us, God is willing to forgive us of our sin, and we can be liberated from the bonds of this sin if we only believe and call on the Lord for salvation. And I'm not saying that as some type of Christian obligation, because I'm a Christian truther or whatever. No, I'm a man who didn't come to Christ until I was around age 30. And I have been on the Crowley side of this in the past. And I'm here to tell you that God has restored and transformed my life, so take that for what you will, but it's the truth. And you know what's beautiful? Even Aleister Crowley could have been saved if he would have called out to God and repented of his sins and believed on the name of Jesus. But you know what's sad? He didn't. And so here's my final statement regarding everything we just went over. Don't be like Aleister Crowley. Don't be so arrogant in your opposition to God that you find yourself dying old and alone in the grips of depression and addiction. And don't be like Lady Gaga or Lil Nas X and lose your soul to a devil who is only blessing you with worldly benefits for the purpose of keeping you on the hook so that you can continue to corrupt souls while simultaneously destroying your own. Because the devil is under no obligation to honor the conditions of any supposed deal that he makes. It's to the contrary. He is a liar by nature. Again, he's the father of lies. And he will certainly trick and deceive anybody who is foolish enough to willingly offer anything to him. He will chew you up and he will spit you out, just like he did with Crowley. And when you're getting zipped up in a body bag at age 27 as some celebrity millionaire rock star or whatever it is, maybe you're just an addict on the street getting zipped up in a body bag, but the devil will continue to use your work and your legacy to corrupt and destroy others and ultimately to engage this war on kids. Because it is the innocent and unsuspecting children of our world who sit in the crosshairs of this entire satanic entertainment complex. And if you couldn't see that before, I hope that you do now. Protect your children. Decry this blasphemous nonsense. And turn to God. Because he's the one who created your soul. And this other guy, he just wants to destroy it. The theme of chapter 1 has been to expose the fact that Satan, who is also the god of this world, happens to be the head of the so-called music industry as well. And by this point in the series, I hope to have convinced you that the music industry and the entertainment industry at large is practically just a domestic weapon of mass psychological warfare, to put it poetically and also to put it bluntly. And even worse, much of it is deliberately designed to corrupt man's faith in God, man's faith in the Christian God, and in the Bible specifically. And when it comes to the modern music industry, that has so many blatant examples of Satanism on display, many of which we've gone over in previous portions of this video series. But you may be wondering at this point why there doesn't seem to be a serious outcry, or backlash from the public with all this stuff. Because to a sensible person, it does seem baffling to consider that such an outright demonic source of influence could be praised and celebrated in the streets, let alone promoted to children or even target marketed to the youth demographic specifically. Yet that's the reality of what's going on around us, and everybody knows that it's true, but there doesn't seem to be any pushback about it. And so you might be wondering, where's the public outcry? But did you know that there was a time when Christians and good parents in America actually attempted to confront and to stand up to the growing influence of Satanism in our culture? Between the 1980s and 90s, there were a few national events which drew public attention to the reality and to the prominence of satanic cults in high places. There was a really popular book at that time called Michelle Remembers, which chronicled the details of a woman's psychiatric sessions while she was undergoing a controversial practice that's known as recovered memory therapy. During these sessions, Michelle unearthed a terrifying well of memories. She suddenly recalled the gruesome details of satanic rituals that she was forced to attend throughout her childhood. Her memories included being present to human sacrifices and abortions and sexual and physical abuse against her and others, as well as the desecration of corpses, and that's just to name a few. And those are some pretty tame examples, by the way. Though the book had many critics, it was a bestseller, and it sparked an avalanche of similar allegations being made by people everywhere, all that had corroborating claims of their own experiences at the hands of these cults. The technical term for this type of crime is SRA, or satanic ritual abuse. It's a real phenomenon by which law enforcement has been well aware for a long time. But before this time, people had no idea of its prevalence, and the world was shocked by the volume of allegations being made against ritual abuse by people everywhere. What was most surprising to the general public was that a lot of these occurrences seemed to be most prominent in high-class and affluent communities. But of course, ever since Epstein didn't kill himself, this statistic makes a lot more sense to everybody. And then there was the McMartin preschool nightmare, or as it's referred to these days, the McMartin preschool trial. And this involved the staff of McMartin Preschool in Manhattan Beach, California, being accused of satanic ritual abuse by 360 students. I did not misspeak there. 360 students alleged to have been abused by the staff at this school. But, as if that's not sickening enough, the allegations went far beyond physical and sexual abuse. These children were literally telling identical stories about being pimped out to rich people and being made to participate in bizarre rituals. And apparently there were like tunnels underneath the school, and it was just really bizarre. And I gotta summarize this for the sake of time and for the sake of staying on topic, but you really should take the time to look deeper into this McMartin preschool trial thing. I mean, it's just nuts. But here's the thing about it. It was the longest running and most expensive trial in American history, and yet nobody knows about it. We all remember O.J. Simpson's trial, but not the McMartin preschool trial. Similarly, we also don't remember the Franklin scandal, as it's called, which was another bombshell revelation from the late 1980s. This one incriminated politicians and bankers and other elite figures, but it also had connections to Satanism, like the McMartin thing. But once again, it went under the media's radar as they focused on whatever was going on with the celebrities and with the rock stars. And sadly, things haven't changed when it comes to this tactic, you know. I mean, even as I record this, every outlet of the mainstream media is reporting on the divorce trial of two celebrities that are getting divorced. But meanwhile, there was a total media blackout concerning the Ghislaine Maxwell trial, who was Jeffrey Epstein's pimp, but whatever, I just had to throw that in there. But anyways, as all these big cases continued unfolding throughout the late 1980s and the early 1990s, society began to revolt against Satanism and actually began to revolt against, the satanic symbolism that was popping up everywhere. And the prevalence of all these horrible events in the news that were associated with Satanism caused a rightful stir in Americans at that time. And many people were amazed to discover that many of their favorite entertainment icons were associated with the occult, and churches were encouraging their congregations to destroy their rock and roll tapes and CDs, and there was a little revival going on against Satanism and against its influence in our culture. And it would seem that people were finally kind of drawing their line in the sand. But as the church rallied against the growing influence of Satanism, in our culture, the rest of society embraced it. And while the old classic rock bands and the popular celebrities from the hippie era were all coming under fire for their occultic associations, there was a new trend emerging. One where Satanism was just explicitly celebrated, just blatantly, just in its face. Because after all, rock and roll was always about rebellion, right? It was always about, if it's too loud, then you're too old, right? It just kept getting louder and faster and faster and louder, till eventually singing just turned into screaming, and it just turned into a competition over who could be more extreme and intense. And what could be more rebellious, by the way, than to represent Lucifer himself, the original rebel. And all these admittedly and outspoken satanic bands started rolling out to mainstream audiences. In fact, Satanism became so normalized within metal that most kids associated the pentagram symbol just with metal music. And over the course of a decade or so, this blatant satanic stuff became more and more commonplace until it eventually permeated the entire music industry. And it became pop. And it got to the point that the majority of your top 40 radio hits all had some hint of occulticism or Satanism in it. So needless to say, the spontaneous popularity of this pro-satanic music, and pro-satanic trends in the youth culture was alarming. And for a time, it was fiercely opposed. But the opponents of this agenda had more than music to contend with. See, Satanism was cool now. It was pop culture. It was in the comic books, it was in the video games, movies, t-shirts, cartoons. It was everywhere. And eventually we went back to nobody really being afraid of Satanism anymore. We just went back there again because our entertainment was so saturated in it, that we were just sort of desensitized to Satanism. And once again, the notion of Satanism being a threat was relegated to the rank of conspiracy theory. It didn't take long before the public just stopped talking about all the high-profile crime cases that implicated Satanism. And soon, the media would mock and ridicule all the solid evidence of SRA that captivated the nation just a decade prior. they began to refer to the entire period of time as the, quote, satanic panic. Can you imagine that? That's what they called it. It was all just turned into a joke, the satanic panic, you know. And that's how they regard it today. That's how the world refers to a Christian revival against evil, the satanic panic. And so once again, I'll remind you about the McMartin preschool trial. It was the longest running and most expensive trial in American history, and yet nobody's heard of it. And then when you try to research it, you can't get 2 paragraphs into the article without being thoroughly reminded that whatever you're about to read has been debunked, redacted, fact-checked, you know, and just discredited all around. You know, and it's the same case with nearly every event since then, which implicates Satanism and which comes under public scrutiny. Satanic panic. That's all you got to say. It's just a blanket term to immediately discredit anything that could potentially reveal the reality that these satanic cults are very real and their influence on society is huge. Look for yourself and you'll see what I mean. But anyways, the point is that after a few decades of Satanism being trivialized, you know, in entertainment, the social majority now has an attitude of indifference towards Satanism. But the problem is that Satan is not indifferent towards us. He roams about like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. Of course, we didn't just fall into this hellhole overnight, you know. It was a long crawl to get to this point. But I believe that each step was strategic and deliberate, as the spirit of this world carried us from a place where Elvis Presley was censored on TV because his dance moves were too provocative, you know, and into a world where the song WAP, or W-A-P by Cardi B, which is a literal article of pornography, mind you, was nominated as the Song of the Year. And it was also performed live at the Grammys in front of millions of families watching from home. You know, mothers and grandparents and children all sitting around watching this softcore porn together, you know, that's nominated as the Song of the Year. And it really is just a clown world now. But as you and I stand back in the background, just looking out at a world that is falling apart, there is a whole generation of children standing in the foreground, looking out to a world that is still full of wonder that's yet to be discovered. And that's what I'm warning you about. I'm warning you that in order to protect our children, we need to teach them to protect themselves. We need to raise them in the truth of God's word, and they must understand who the enemy is, because you can't fight a war if you don't know who the enemy is. And I hate to say it, but our children are at war, fighting for their very identity. And most of the parents are completely AWOL here within the War on Kids.
Judas Priest explode into the Capitol Center this Saturday. Judas Priest live
Fine,
with special
Harry.
guest Dawkins.
Pretty good.
Tickets for Judas Priest this
Going
Saturday.
inside of the concert?
Have
fun, Judas Priest.
I mean, I want you to talk after.
You've heard the band? Have you heard?
I've heard a little bit on tape, that's all.
Just say what you think of their music.
I like the instruments. I don't care for the beat.
You don't care for Alfonso. What about the lyrics? Have you read any of the lyrics?
I despise the lyrics.
What do you hate about them?
It's because they're all Satan worship.
It's all Satan.
If they don't like it, then fine. Actually, I get off on people not liking us because, you know, I like it when people really hate us because that fits our image, and I can really be obnoxious to them and stuff, you know, just because it's...
I don't know if it's a ritual or if it's just the beat. I don't know if it's the words or if it's the beat that he likes. But
You gotta kind of go out there and just, right at first, just jump around and bang your head and thrash and do whatever you want, you know? That's the way I feel. Just do whatever you want.
What do you think about the type of music that they play? I mean, the beat and the words. What's the problem with the words?
to me, I've listened to the words, I've read the words, and all I can see, I'm a Christian, and I do not like the words. To me, they're all Satan worship, about hell, about devils, about satanic. I don't want anything to do with it.
I'm David Helby, I'm 20 years old. I'm ready to rock.
Dawn, I'm 13.
Who are you here to see tonight?
Judas Priest!
Mrs. Eckert, when you were a teenager, when you were Eddie's age, what kind of music did you listen to?
Oh, let's see, rock and roll, Elvis Presley. It was before the Beatles, so that was, I don't even remember the groups.
Do you remember what people were saying about Elvis Presley?
Oh, well, before I got into the rock and roll, they didn't like him. They thought he was, you know, the way he moved around and his type of music wasn't, they wouldn't accept that. But when I got a little older, it was accepted.
Do you think this is the same thing with Eddie's music? Maybe he'll be more accepted as it goes?
Well, I don't know. I wished he would take his music and put all of his energy in some other direction. I just don't appreciate the music. It seems to me that it's all drug related. Because maybe I'm not that, I don't understand, but I can't see where any good is going to come out of it.
Heavy metal music, it's become an anthem for certain kinds of kids. Who are they? Are they misunderstood?
If anything's on my mind, I just go and sit in my room and play some music.
There has been violence at heavy metal concerts, and stage diving looks lethal for parents who don't understand it.
People are saying that we're a negative influence.
We let the kids explain it. Storm Phillips reports the children of heavy metal.
So you guys like Priest, right? Yeah. I mean, all right. How about Dokken? How's anybody feel about it?
Dokken rules. Metal would not be what it is today.
Are they really about the best?
Yeah.
I mean, they're better. What other shows have you seen here?
But Metallica. To the dawn.
How do you think people perceive you? The image you project. When they look at Ed, who do they see?
Probably a punk. You know? Somebody who's bad. Somebody who trips acid every day, you know? Takes a lot of drugs. But I don't, you know?
How'd you get into hardcore?
Dan, or Damien, whatever, kind of exposed me to it.
Terror at your door, see no more. This is killing murder, this is further desire to set the fire. One life, take a life, give a life, kamikaze.
Terror at your door, save no more. Since it's killing murder, since further desire to start the fire. One life, give a life, take a life, kamikaze, destroy. Girls and boys with great joy, send body bags. That's...
What's it mean?
Well, it means, you know, self-inflicting death, you know? Doing things, like that verse right there means, it means, you know, terrorists, you know? Killing other people.
Talk about the generation gap a little bit. How old are you?
21. 19. What can I say?
What do you guys think you're young or a little old to be here?
Look at these other two guys, man. We've been coming up Priest every year.
Younger crowd now. It used to be an older crowd. Man. This is the 6th time I've seen the Priest.
Oh yeah?
It's probably the first time, most of it, you know.
Yeah.
There you go.
Oh, let's see. It's just the words. It's power. Give the devil power. And there's nothing to do with God or anything like that. It was just praising the devil, giving him the glory, and I just don't care for that. It was all things that I didn't like, you know, the killing, the how they treated children and the blood and all that. I just didn't care for it.
Just jump around, bang my head, thrash, move around. If I feel like it, just fall down on the ground and spaz out. You know? Just whatever.
Alright, what's your name?
Graham, man, like grab a dirt and shit.
Yeah.
One last question I have for you. Do you think that he has a price to pay in terms of God and so on and so forth for this kind of music?
Oh, definitely. If you read the Bible, if you read the scriptures, definitely.
In what way?
Well, if you know, it says either you're for me or you're against me. That's what the Bible said. And if you're against me, he says, I'll spew you out of my mouth. And there's going to be a time when the Lord comes, and if Eddie's not ready, he's going to go to a place that he doesn't want to go. He's not serving God. He's far from serving God. He knows the Bible. Eddie does. And even though he may not be doing anything wrong, he's not doing what God wants him to do.
all I can say is that I'm not doing this to, I'm not saying, well, I'm going to do this, and I don't care about serving God and things like that. I'm just doing this to express myself, you know, doing what I want.
Let's recap what's been covered in the first and second part of this documentary series before moving on. We've been focusing mainly on the music industry, and in part one, I did my best to prove the point that our modern entertainment industry exists almost for the sole purpose of social indoctrination and just to desensitize us, you know, from morality and from moral righteousness. And what's worse is that this agenda is deliberately targeted towards the youth. And we discussed the invention of celebrated people, you know, aka celebrities, and examined how these celebrated people all tend to promote the same movements and the same trends and social ideologies, and therein exposing themselves of being little more than musically proficient change agents, you know, rather than actual creative artists who are honestly expressing themselves. And then in part two, I just lamented the reality that we are all part of a society that by and large worships these celebrated people, you know, and the music that they produce. But it's worse than simply promoting a liberal narrative, because the real underlying message and intended influence that's being pushed by these so-called artists is a deliberately satanic one. And part two breaks down the evidence to substantiate this fact by centering around the life and influence of infamous dark magician and professed Satanist Aleister Crowley. So I won't waste any more time rehashing what we've already been over, but if you've been following this series, then that's a refresher for you. And if you haven't seen part 1 and 2, then I hope that I've intrigued you enough to drop everything and watch them both immediately. Or maybe after this video. But anyways, that brings us up to speed. And here we are, in a society that is largely hypnotized by the enchantments of this satanic propaganda that's disguised as entertainment. You know, not even just entertainment, but inspiring entertainment, and entertainment that's meant to motivate and to change lives. You know, if you listen to Disney, entertainment which is conducted by people who are oftentimes open and practicing witches and occultists who specialize in hoodwinking others. And I just feel like I'm stuck in this dystopian world where I'm surrounded by screens and speakers that are constantly broadcasting the same propaganda, you know. And it's not just your ordinary political propaganda, not just marketing propaganda, but it's this destructive and anti-human propaganda. You know, and I think if you look at this stuff carefully and honestly, it's clear to see which target that this propaganda is aimed against. You know, it's God as our creator and any semblance of traditional and moral righteousness. And even without the overt presence of blatant Satanism, you know, which does exist in the entertainment industry, but even without that, this agenda would still be rightfully described as satanic, simply based on its outcome, you know, and the effect that it has on society, which is, I think, irrefutably negative. I mean, how else would you describe a system that will openly hypnotize its subjects only to then bombard them with messages of self-destruction, you know? And it's successfully and effectively transforming this world around us into the prophesied beast system, in my opinion. And it's happening right before our eyes. I mean, just look outside. How many young people have covered their bodies now, you know, and faces with tattoos, often depicting demonic symbolism, no less? Children walking around dressed like androgynous prostitutes. I mean, I've seen sweet old ladies that are wearing clothing or accessories that bear the image of skulls and crossbones, you know, and everyone's just obsessed with this culture of death and destruction. You know, popular music, which was once brilliant and complex and beautiful, you know, and which once evoked inspiration in the masses, has largely been replaced by this dumbed-down, hypnotic, and abrasive noise pollution that tends to revel in messages of sadness and anger. You know, alternatively, much of today's popular music is defined by its level of edginess or shock value. Rappers who boast of their violent crimes against others, you know, or lyrics that depict sex in pornographic detail. And then rock music, which has become practically synonymous with the imagery of death, you know, metal music, as much as I personally enjoy some of it, but you just can't deny how much metal music is obsessed with death. These album covers that you're seeing right now are just a small sample of some metal bands that are actually really popular and super famous. So if that says anything about the world that we're living in. these metal bands are an extreme example of this obsession with death, but really it is everywhere. I mean, the most popular shows on TV are true crime shows that detail events of murder and violence, and movies are no better, most commonly centered around themes of murder and violence, seduction and betrayal. You know, serial killers, that's the stuff that we like because we have this bloodlust, you know, and I'm guilty of it too. But let's not deny it. And how about video games? I mean, when I was playing Nintendo 64 25 years ago, even back then, games were all based around the concept that for some reason or another, your character needs to go around killing people, you know, because that's what's fun for us, I guess. It's a culture of death. I mean, you guys, even as I'm making this video, there are literally protesters raging in the city's streets outside, conducted by angry pro-choicers who are absolutely furious about the prospect that killing babies may soon be illegal in some states. You know, they view humans as disposable. And why shouldn't they? They're born into a world that teaches you that from childhood, you are this soulless animal, just taking up space and threatening nature by your mere existence. You know, and so we're conditioned to disrespect ourselves. You know, we're taught that we're overpopulating the planet and we're just ruining everything. You know, we're like parasites against Mother Nature. You know, and monkeys, that's what they say that we came from. You know, we evolved from monkeys, and we call our children kids, just like the name of this documentary, you know, but that's really a name for a young goat. And so we send our little young goats off to schools that corrupt their innocent minds with anti-scientific nonsense designed to sow seeds of confusion into their ever so trusting minds. You know, confusion about their very identity, no less. And that was a generous way to word that, by the way. What I should have said is that we send our children off to indoctrination centers filled with perverted freaks who like to prey on the innocence of children. You know, and all these kids are just talking about how many hookers they killed in Grand Theft Auto last night and whatever was on South Park, you know, and they're listening to all this obscene music, which is marketed and targeted, you know, to that particular age demographic. And everywhere they look, it's just a reinforcement of this same kind of satanic crap. You know, and when it comes to what influences children in 2022, look no further than the very same trash that you see while you're surfing the internet, or while you're flipping through YouTube or scanning through the radio. You know, because these days there's no barrier between what you see and what the kids see. This internet era has opened everything up, and it's all right there out in the open. And even the worst and most extreme pornographic material that you could imagine is now being viewed by millions of kids. You know, in the same way that you and me may have peeked at our grandparents' Playboy or something like that back when we were kids. I mean, just think about that. I'm in my mid-30s, and I'm sad to confess that after years of exposure to porn and violent media, you know, and this kind of stuff, it's haunted my imagination, you know. And even as a Christian to this day, I just can't unsee so much of what I've placed before my eyes over the years. And that's why it breaks my heart to consider the effects that are being incurred on the youth of today by this trash. Because the stuff that we once regarded as pornographic is now just, you know, mainstream and acceptable by the new public standard. You know, that's the kind of stuff that just gets passed around as a funny meme, you know, by kids that are playing on their smartphones while sitting in class. Which, could you even imagine that, by the way? I remember I used to play with my calculator and try to pretend it was a video game, you know, but kids these days, like, actually have access to the internet and the, you know, smartphones while they're sitting in class, but that's neither here nor there. But anyways, these music videos today, you know, they're just chock full of all this sex and satanic symbolism, and this standard of today of what's acceptable when it comes to this kind of stuff is what, again, we used to regard as pornographic. You know, half-naked women and men alike are twerking on these videos against provocative backdrops, you know, and even the lyrics of these popular songs are describing and celebrating the indulgence in every sin that you could imagine. And that spans all of these different genres of music, you know, modern music, all the way to pop music, all the way to what you hear on Kids Bop CDs. And while a sane and competent society might cringe at, you know, at the popularity of such unsophisticated trends as this, a satanic society that has been incrementally debased over years and generations, you know, like ours, actually cheers and invites this mess into our lives, you know, and we applaud these clowns and we beg for their autographs. And all these so-called stars are then promoted to the youth as figures that are worthy of worship, you know, and they roll them out onto the stages of events like the Nickelodeon Kids' Choice Awards, where they're presented as acceptable role models, and they prance around in their designer clothes and their mini skirts, and they bask in the attention and praise that they receive from your children. But why shouldn't your children worship these people, you know, and worship this system? Is this not the culture that we've modeled for them? You know, because when I was growing up, it was kind of a similar situation, at least in terms of the celebrity worship thing, with the rock stars always being on these elevated stages, towering above you, you know, with lights shining at them while you just chant and cheer and just try to touch their clothes if you get close enough, you know, like just practically worshiping these rock stars. That existed when I was young. You know, when I was really young, it was like Michael Jordan and Hulk Hogan, you know, those were my idols. But then as I got a little bit older and became a teenager, I traded out my old idols and got new ones, which were usually punk rockers, you know, and underground rappers and these kinds of people. And that was sort of the route that I went, you know, music. But other friends of mine chose to adopt athletes and movie stars as their new idols. But either way, in the end, we were all transitioned seamlessly from adolescence into adulthood without the system losing one moment of our undivided attention. But nobody ever wants to be labeled as brainwashed, though, myself included. You know, we don't identify as sheeple or cattle, but we all act that way, you know, just inserting ourselves into these pre-formatted categories, you know, these secular categories and styles and subcultures that we can identify with, you know. I mean, it was most annoying in my music days because I was surrounded by all these other aspiring rock star types who were also concerned with their public image and their insistence of their own importance. And the big catchphrases were always self-expression and individuality. By associating with these bands, you know, and having the same piercings and tight pants and face tattoos, you know, it was supposedly all about self-expression. Because, of course, there's no better way to express yourself than to dress and sing and behave like everybody else in whatever clique it is that you desire the acceptance of. You know, and how could you possibly be more rebellious than to cover your arms in tattoos and get piercings all over the place just like every other rapper and rock star does? How original, you know, and I don't know, it's just cringy to me as an artist how stuff like this passes for original when in reality it's all just variations of the same thing, you know, because these modern genres of music have created actual subcultures. Like there's subcultures that are associated with a genre of music and we just accept that as a normal thing. Like, oh, that's a totally regular thing, and you know, but clearly it's about a lot more than just music, you know, it's about lifestyle. I mean, have you ever noticed how you can almost tell what type of music somebody listens to just based on the type of clothing that they wear? I mean, of course, there's exceptions to this, you know, and there's also a lot of people who enjoy a wide variety of music styles, but just as a rule of thumb, you know, the guy in a cowboy hat and his tucked-in flannel shirt is probably not the world's #1 Tupac fan, right? And the guy with the green mohawk and the nose ring that's got tattoos of demons up and down his arms is probably not into Dave Matthews Band. Everybody just happens to slightly resemble the celebrities that they like the most, you know. Every genre of music seems to be accompanied with its own dress style to accommodate it. And I think that the truth is that the people of this fallen world are really just lost, like the Bible says, you know. And while their preferences and tastes may certainly differ, what they're truly seeking is community. You know, they don't want to be alone. But it's really sad, you know, because these worldly styles are just man-made constructs. And in modern times, these secular styles end up kind of defining people's identity. You know, people do find communities within these so-called music genres, you know, but everything that comes along with a certain style. So it's like if you're into punk rock music, you're not just into punk rock music, you're probably also into skateboarding, and then by association, probably snowboarding, and you probably like old school hip hop too, because that's allowed by that standard, you know. Whereas if you're really into country music, you're probably also really into the Second Amendment, you know, and so on and so forth, you know. But it's just like politics and sports and competition, and it's just like everything else. People don't actually want to embrace their individuality. People want to fit in. You know, people certainly don't want to go against the grain. But I think the fact that these modern music styles have actually created these subcultures, and I shouldn't even say that they created them, you know, in reality, I suppose this was probably always part of the same agenda, as is everything else. But in the end, when you have subcultures, when you have actual, you know, cults, practically, cultures of people associating themselves under the banner of, you know, this band or this style of music, and they all take on a certain stylized way of dressing and acting and behaving, it's just all really cult-like, you know. And it ranges from obvious to ridiculous. You know, whether it's a biker guy with his AC/DC shirt, you know, or deadheads in their tie-dye shirts and their patchouli-drenched bandanas. Or how about juggalos, you know, who are literally dressed like homicidal clowns. I mean, it's just crazy that it's this easy to control people but that is the reality of what's going on. It's not a coincidence that when the Beatles were popular, all the teenage boys on the streets of, you know, every European country in America had haircuts just like the Beatles did. And the bizarre fashions and new styles that are donned by all these celebrities or celebrated people, you know, 2 years later become what you see everybody wearing down the sidewalks, you know, and that's how the influence works, and that's how the whole thing works. And it's just sad for me to accept that so many of these people around me in the fallen world are embracing these subcultures, you know, but not just embracing them, they attach their identity to these subcultures. That's the key word, identity. That word is the key to understanding the true nature of this war on kids. There is indeed a war on kids. And I can't imagine a sadder statement than the one that I'm about to say. But Satan himself is using the systems of this world to entrap, corrupt, and destroy your children from within. This term identity will soon be used to dismantle your family. As your child sets out on his or her journey into the real world, they will be met by zealous recruiters at every corner. Zealous recruiters of every variation of secularism and humanism. They represent every possible combination of sin and foolishness out there. But each will offer one similar promise: inclusion in a community, you know, acceptance, a greater sense of identity, popularity, you know, within those communities. And identity, that's like the most important thing. The word itself means the fact of being who or what a person or thing is. The fact of being who or what a person or thing is. At least that's what it means according to the dictionary. But according to your child's third grade teacher, identity means whatever you perceive yourself to be, you know, or whatever you temporarily perceive yourself to be in this moment. And whether it's coming from the LGBT movement or the entertainment industry or right out of the mouths of your kids' teachers, children are being pulled in every direction from all these different points of influence that are all targeting them directly and trying to persuade them into some weird allegiance to the New World Order, an allegiance to humanism. But it's really more than that. We need to understand that this battle over identity, actually this battle over the very word identity and the definition of it, it's really a battle for souls. But what does the Bible say about our identity? Off the top of my head, I know the Bible says that we're all born into sin, and that when we were of the world, we identified with the things of this world, but when we accept God's gift of salvation, we have a new identity in Christ. Check out some of these verses. In Genesis 1, it says, "So God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him. Male and female created he them." You know, so first off, we're created in God's own image. So there's the foundation of your identity right there. But let's go on. In Psalms 51, it says, "Behold, I was shapen in iniquity, and in sin did my mother conceive me." And then a few pages later, the psalmist writes this, "The wicked are estranged from the womb. They go astray as soon as they be born, speaking lies." You know, so we're made in the image of God, but we're also born into sin. And there's so many other verses like this. You know, Ecclesiastes 7:20 says, "For there is not a just man upon earth that doeth good and sinneth not." And so since we're all born into the slavery of sin, I think that people of this fallen world can rightfully identify with any lies that they would like to, you know, whether that's a different gender or a hedonistic lifestyle. Because without Christ, sin is what defines your identity. And that's why you need to be born again. And if you do that, you'll share the same identity that I take refuge in, and that's Jesus Christ. Because there's other verses like this. 1 Corinthians 6, verses 19 through 20 says, "Know ye not that your body is the temple of the Holy Ghost which is in you, which ye have of God, and ye are not your own." You know, you're not your own, you're God's. "For ye are bought with a price. Therefore glorify God in your body and in your spirit, which are God's." Because your identity is in Christ, who is God, right? 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 17 says, "Therefore, if any man be in Christ, he is a new creature. Old things are passed away. Behold, all things are become new." This new identity. Galatians chapter 2 says, "I am crucified with Christ. Nevertheless I live. Yet not I, but Christ liveth in me. And the life which I now live in the flesh, I live by the faith of the Son of God, who loved me and gave himself for me." So you can identify as a guy or a girl or a monster truck, but if you ask me what I identify as, I'm going to say a son of God. So now that I feel like I've sufficiently lambasted the credibility of the music industry and exposed it for the control mechanism that it actually is, I feel like this is a solid foundation to build on. because sadly, music is only one small aspect of this greater agenda. So moving forward, this documentary series is going to enter some pretty dark places as I attempt to prove my case that our children are under direct assault by the very same forces that most parents invite and applaud. Music was a great launching pad because music is like a bridge, as they say, the universal language. Everybody's affected by music. And I think that more so than any other influence, music has probably served as the main catalyst which has invited so many of these satanic and negative and evil trends into our everyday life that we're surrounded by now. But I'm sad to report that the worst is still yet to come. I believe that we are approaching the verge of a major event, some type of social fracture. And I believe that soon the world that you see outside your window will look a lot different. Society has been polarized, seemingly beyond rectification, and the true authoritarian nature of the New World Order is now being revealed for everybody to see. Never before have the nations of this world been so unified in the promotion of a worldwide agenda like what we are seeing today. From global warming and universal basic income to digital identity, governments across the world who have traditionally operated according to their own interests are now working in concert at the behest of the United Nations to accomplish certain common goals. 17 Sustainable Development Goals, to be specific. And it's all laid out for the public to see right in the UN Agenda 2030 plan. You know, and here we are in 2022 is the date that I'm recording this documentary. So we're 8 years away from 2030, you know, the date by which they would like for all of these 17 goals to have been accomplished. And for the entire history of this channel, I've been encouraging you people to research Agenda 2030 for yourselves. And I guess I'll do that once again right here. Because when you understand the agenda, then you understand that the collapse of society is essential to the agenda's success. Because before you can build something new, you need to destroy what's already there.
You never want a serious crisis to go to waste. And what I mean by that, it's an opportunity to do things that you think you could not do before.
Never waste a good crisis. And when it comes to the economic crisis, don't waste it when it can have a very positive impact on climate change and energy security, and that's what we're trying to do.
And right now, we're watching governments crash their own economies, and we're seeing governments imprison innocent people in their own homes. Fake news outlets like CNN continue getting caught red-handed staging fake war footage, you know, giving a whole new meaning to the concept of rumors of war. And finally, you know, people like me who speak out, and preachers and pastors and missionaries and everybody else that goes against this stuff is being systematically silenced on social media and even publicly, you know, so the stage is being set. And when this goes down, the event will be politicized. But don't be deceived, because this is not about politics. This is a spiritual war. The battlefield is now active, and as the war drums grow louder, our children are the ones standing on the front lines, as their parents dance around in the trenches like a bunch of idiots that can't even see that there's a war going on.